Despite the bumpy road his term has seen, Rob Ford did soundly win the 2010 Toronto municipal election. While that might seem incredible to fathom, our next guest says it actually makes perfect sense. And joining us now to help unpack the who and the why of Rob Ford voters, here's Zack Taylor. He's a professor of city studies at the University of Toronto in Scarborough, and it's nice to have you here on the program.
My pleasure.
You've put out a map here after having done some research on what the 2010 election results look like, and that really does sum it up quite well. Take us through this, because we see where, I guess, Ford Nation is in the dark blue, and where George Smitherman, the former deputy premier who challenged Rob Ford for mayor in 2010, where his support was essentially in the old city. And what does all of that tell you?
Well, when right after the election, I saw the maps published in the newspapers that showed the ward-by-ward breakdowns, a lot of blue wards in the suburbs, a lot of pink wards in the core. And I thought, it's got to be more complicated than this. There has to be pockets of Smitherman support in the suburbs. There have to be pockets of Ford support downtown. So I got a hold of the poll-by-poll data from the city, and I mapped this much more fine-grained map. And I found that, in fact, there is this incredible political geography at work. There is a core and there is a suburban area. Ford did overwhelmingly well in the suburbs. 80% of his votes came from outside of the former city of Toronto, and Smitherman held on to a residual, which was basically the former city of Toronto.
But the fact is there's more inner suburbs than there is old city, and so if you win the inner suburbs, you win.
70% of eligible voters are in the old metro suburbs, not in the city of Toronto.
What do we know about that blue chunk on the map? Who are those people?
Well, here's the problem. Because we don't do a lot of polling, right, of local elections in the same way that we do with federal and provincial elections, we don't know a lot about the psychology or the individual choices of the people. What we do know is stuff about the neighborhoods in which they live, and so that is the extent that I'm able to make an analysis, is to say that the areas that tended to vote for Ford have particular characteristics that diverge from the areas that voted for Smitherman.
For example?
So, far more likely to commute by automobile, tend to have lower levels of educational attainment, tend to to not work in higher end service jobs, the kind of thing that Richard Florida, when he talks about the creative class, that kind of employment is much more prevalent in the core area. Higher levels of home ownership in the suburbs. None of these things.
You've actually, Zach, you've put out a chart on this, and I think we've got it here. So why don't we put that up, and then we can go through this together here.
Sure.
If we can, control room, I'm on page 3 here. Yes, you've got it. Ford Nation versus Smitherman Village, I guess we're calling this thing here.
That was my tongue-in-cheek.
Okay, but you're right. Yeah. Household income, Ford Nation's household income is significantly less than Smitherman Village's household income. On the issue of university or post-secondary education, Smitherman Village, again, almost 2-to-1 over Ford Nation. If you're talking about home ownership, however, you've got Ford Nation with a higher degree of home ownership, presumably more rentals in Smitherman's Village. And the average home value, interestingly enough, in the old city is higher among Smitherman Village types. Okay, so what does that tell you?
Well, I want to be absolutely clear that I'm not talking about the individual people, that every single individual person in those areas of support, they have these characteristics. What I'm saying is, on average, the area of support has this aggregate characteristic. So I want to be very clear about that, because
but you're being too careful here, because people live where they live.
I'm an academic.
Okay, I hear you. No, that's a good point. You haven't empirically proven this yet, I guess, in your research, but it's probably fair to conclude that if you like certain things about life, you'll live in the inner suburbs. If you like other things, you'll live in the inner city.
I think there's a certain degree of what we call self-selection.
Right.
People choose where to live based on the kind of experience or lifestyle they want to lead to some degree. But how can we explain this divide? Is there what natural law is there that means that there must be a city-suburb divide in this city? And I can infer two explanations for this.
Go ahead.
The first, I think, has to do with amalgamation. 15 years ago, we amalgamated the city with its suburbs, and these two areas of metro had different kinds of politics. And I think it may be fair to say they had different, that people who lived in these areas had different expectations of what local government was for. In the downtown, with its walkable streets, its transit systems, its collective amenities, the museums and so on, the wealthy tax base from the downtown was able to create these kinds of collective amenities, a collective perspective on what local government could do as a vehicle for local democracy, in a sense. And when we look at the politics of the old city of Toronto, I think we can see that. When you look at the politics of the old metro suburbs, Etobicoke, North York, Scarborough, York, and to some degree East York, what you see is a politics that's more focused on property-related services. It's a leaner view of what government is for. When amalgamation occurs, it means that these two groups, these two outlooks, have to share a political unit, really, for the first time.
Strange bedfellows.
And we have not worked that out, and we're not going to work that out for a long time. This is older than Rob Ford. Rob Ford perhaps captured something in that, was able to articulate that and create a wedge in that completely honestly and authentically. I think he believes this was not a calculated act on his part. He is a product of this.
Well, he's born and raised in Etobicoke, yeah. And so is it as simple? Well, nothing's as simple as to say, but is it mostly acceptable to say you like government less and you want government out of your pocket more if you live in the inner suburbs, and you like government more and need government more and expect more services from government if you live in the old city?
I think this is a generalization you could make really about any city in North America, that there are sort of different lifestyles that people lead in different zones of the city that are tied to the physical relationship of the city and the social geography of the city. But I don't think this is just about amalgamation. I think there's something else going on. And my colleagues at University of Toronto who have done work on the three cities, I'm fairly certain that you've done interviews on this, the idea that
David Hulchanski's
work, Alan Walks's work, that the city of Toronto and really all of the metropolitan areas in this country have been bifurcating really into two cities, a city that's on its way up and a city that's on its way down.
And Ford represents those who feel their city is on the way down.
Well, I think that there is a certain kind of voter in the suburbs who says, look, all the benefits of this so-called boom seem to be flowing downtown.
Right.
It doesn't. It's a frame. It doesn't matter if it's true or not, but it feels that way.
Right. Let's talk about cars. And
sure.
Control room again here. Board number 2, please. How you get to work says a lot, you have decided, or you have determined, I guess, about how you vote. If you drive to work, if you get around a lot by car, you're overwhelmingly, as those numbers suggest, almost by a 2-to-1 ratio, a member of Ford Nation versus Smitherman Village. If, however, you get around by bicycle or you walk, you are more than 5 times as likely to be part of the Smitherman Village than Ford Nation. So yeah, we're pro-car in the inner suburbs, and we're very much anti-car, pro-bike, pro-walking downtown.
How do you get around in a low-density suburb?
Yeah.
In a car, right? So in some sense, the fact that travel behavior was maybe the single biggest, most significant determinant of whether a neighborhood was going to go for Ford or versus Smitherman is a symptom of the physical environment, right? We're talking about low-density suburbs that have fairly good transit service by North American standards, but it's still, we're talking about vast distances on buses with changes and things. It's a painful commute. And people are more likely to drive. Driving is a solitary pursuit. You are mad at traffic. And a guy comes along and says, look, I'm going to fix this. I'm going to end the war on the car.
End the war on the cars, yeah.
And we have the longest commute time, the study showed recently, in North America.
80+ minutes.
So somebody articulates that message so cleanly, so clearly. We're going to lower taxes. We're going to make government more efficient and cheaper. We're going to end this war on the car and make your commute better. Who's that going to appeal to? And quite rightly so. We have a major problem in this city.
Here are 2 factions I'm going to mention in the same breath, and you wouldn't think to put them in the same breath because they seem like quite opposite sides of perhaps the same coin, but you explain this to me. Ford Nation on the one hand, and all of the characteristics you've just described, and the Occupy movement on the other hand, which we remember from a year or 2 back, taking over parks and trying to represent the so-called 99%. Is there a similarity between these two?
And others have made a connection to the Tea Party in the United States. Rob Ford represents a certain kind of populist politics, politics that talks from the outside, that says that the system is broken. I am from the outside, I can fix that system. And that is the frame that he was so successful, brilliantly successful at positioning during that election, and that he has continued to play ever since as mayor. What we are seeing in the city of Toronto and across North America is an image of suburbs that are experiencing economic decline through deindustrialization, through the switch to a service economy, and the geography of that is very uneven. The gentrifying downtowns are on their way up. The inner suburbs with aging housing stock that are hard to service, that are perhaps less attractive than the outer suburbs in the 905 and the equivalent elsewhere. These are areas that are experiencing a downward trajectory, and that squeeze.
Why someone would be a champion of this group would. Someone wanting to champion that group would come along and catch a lot of votes.
If you are not employed to the degree that you would like, if you've been experiencing declining real wages over 2 decades, if everyone you know is in similar straits, your taxes appear to keep going up. And what do you hear on the news day after day is this narrative that Toronto is a boom town, downtown condo boom, waterfront, green building, all this stuff. And I can completely understand why someone says, what does that mean to me? I'm in the squeeze.
Right.
What can you do for me? And this guy appears at the right moment and says, I will return your calls. I'm like you. So what prospect is there to create a new bridge? I think there's an opportunity. I think there's a way to create a new narrative in this city, and I hope that the people who are interested in running for office in the future can find a way to create a new bridging narrative. One thing that's for sure is that if you look at the proportion of the vote in the 2011 Ontario and federal elections, the first party in the city of Toronto was the Liberal Party, by far. Yeah. The NDP were quite marginal. They won big in the ridings they won, but not much outside.
Although I note with interest a new poll out today, and it's a snapshot, and it's worth what you paid for it. Yeah. First place for who you want for mayor today is Olivia Chow, New Democrat. Second place, John Tory, Conservative. Yeah. Both of whom are associated with the old city of Toronto as opposed to the inner suburbs. Yeah. So we'll continue to watch with interest. Right. Zack Taylor, you're not named after the president, are you?
It was an accident.
It was an accident. Okay. Zack Taylor, good of you to come in today from U of T Scarborough. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.